And then what do you think about pharmaceutical companies?
That's a good question, right? Yeah, there are differences, right? I'm like, they are also into the business, right? But what I think, certain medicines that require certain kind of drugs. For example, I was talking to someone who had anxiety, and it's allowed doctor prescribe him medical marijuana. For him, it works, right? So there's no harm that pharmaceutical or doctors or Walgreens or whatever they're selling it. There's no problem. What I'm talking about drugs is high school kids and stuff like that who does it for fun. It's not good.
Right. So recreationally, it's a bad thing, and medically, it's a good thing.
Good thing, yeah.
And do you think that street drug distribution is the main cause of the opioid epidemic in the Northeast, or the war on drugs in general, especially in the United States?
Yes, I think so.
You think it's based from the streets, right? And because from what I've learned, a lot of the opioid epidemics and stories from people who are recovering addicts, you know, they break a leg or have a major injury and they get prescribed to Valium or Percocet, right? And then that is the gateway. That pharmaceutical prescription is the gateway into them seeking out things like heroin on the streets. And you see that especially in Boston and other places in the Northeast, where those opioid prescriptions lead to terrible addiction.
It's interesting study, and seriously, I wasn't aware of that. But yeah, it makes sense now. All right. But if you are in pain, you have to have some kind of medicines, right? So.
Okay. Do you think that pharmaceutical companies are kind of just like drug dealers?
No.
No.
As a physician, I see both sides of the argument. I have seen some drugs, especially for orphan conditions, so conditions that are very uncommon, be very overpriced because there's a single company that makes it, and then they can charge whatever they want.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that I think the whole pharma industry needs to go out with the baby in the bathwater.
And then do you think that pharmaceutical dispensaries and things of that nature, do you think they're drug dealers as well?
Yeah. I mean, they design drugs to be addictive in order to get people to continue buying their drugs. It's the same with like big tobacco. You know, they design these things so that people come back and continue to get them. And I mean, it's a business model that works, and it's worked for centuries. That's why pharmaceutical companies do that. And I mean, it's dangerous, and obviously there are certain drugs that are necessary and they aren't harmful. But I think pharmaceutical companies commit a crime in a different way, where it's like they make these drugs that are necessary for people to live and then make them unattainable price-wise to certain people. And I think that's worse than drug dealers or anything like that, yeah.
So do you think that pharmaceutical companies are really the main root of the opioid crisis?
Yeah, 100%. Like every single story you see, I got hurt, and I started with something that was prescribed, and then they make these drugs so addictive that it's like within one prescription, these people become dependent, which is insane, you know?
That's an interesting question. So I would say no, they're not drug dealers. They're creating a substance that has a specific purpose in a medicinal sense, and used appropriately has its purpose. I think the criminality is in the
corporate side.
The corporate side of it, the advertisement, the way they advertise for the drugs. The drug companies themselves shouldn't be, and that's where I think government should step in. I think the regulation for something like an opioid, a pain medication, things like that can get abused, should be regulated way better, way better, because the drug companies make a useful product if it's used appropriately, but it can be abused, and then you have doctors on the side. You know, I've seen many stories of doctors where they write hundreds of thousands of scripts and they abuse the system, and then like the DEA closes in on those people. they arrest those doctors and they go to jail. The issue is not necessarily the drug companies, but the amount of money that they're putting into these things.